Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you joining us via Zoom, we have disabled the chat feature this afternoon, but you are welcome to use the Q&A to send any questions you might have for our speaker. We will be monitoring that. For those of you on Facebook, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to pop those into the comments, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. With that, I'd like to introduce Franco van Oppen, our curator of Greek and Roman art, to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, Brittany, and thank you everyone for joining us today in this hybrid Antiquities Circle lecture. Today's lecture will be within the framework of the exhibition of the Karam collection, or the highlights of the Karam collection. The speaker today is a born and raised Sicilian, Dr. Davide Tenassi, professor of digital humanities at University of South Florida, and I can truly say by now a dear friend of mine. Davide has published widely in scientific and academic books and journals, as well as in popular media. He has participated in archaeological excavations, particularly in the islands of Sicily and Malta. His areas of specialization and interests include pottery and glass, bioarchaeology, biomolecular archaeology, and as such is an expert in ancient diet. Dr. Tenassi is also an expert in digital archaeology, 3D imaging, cultural heritage, and using gaming as a means to get the archaeology to the wider public. But it is within the framework of his work as director of USF's Institute for Digital Exploration that he will talk today about the digital afterlife of the Lebanese archaeological collection of Dr. Farid Karam, of which a selection of highlights is currently on view in the Wallace Promenade at the Tampa Museum of Art. Davide, take it away.
Thank you so much. Basically, he's brought to the Tampa Museum of Art the exhibition, which is upstairs, the highlight of Karam collection. And to do that, I need to start my presentation addressing what are the main challenges that all museums and museum collections face nowadays. Issues of accessibility and issues of including to the learning process, the diverse public, which does not align with the majority of the museum goers. With respect to the accessibility, when it comes to collections which are exhibited by museums, there are some main causes which can determine inaccessibility. First of all, you may live in the opposite side of the world, and you will not have resources necessary to travel and visit the museum and have access to that collection. The museum can be closed, temporarily closed for an extended period, or the area where the collection exhibited is closed. Then there are social and economic factors which will put a portion of the audience in the impossible position to not be able to visit the museum and enjoy a particular collection. And then there are, of course, disabilities, which is a major cause of inaccessibility when it comes to museum collections. Then there are the collections which are not exhibited, the collections which are in the storage. And with respect to that, there are other causes which determine a long-term inaccessibility. And of course, the most important one being lack of funds. And lack of funds translates into lack of staff. Lack of staff translates into lack of space. And without those three components, curators will not be able to put in display even outstanding collections that they have in their custody. An example is the Tampa Museum of Art. In the vault of the Tampa Museum of Art, there are incredible archaeological treasures which will find space in the exhibition area just once in a while when it's possible to rotate the objects. While for the majority of these causes, the solution is money. I mean, money can definitely help. And you can find technical, practical solutions to make those collections accessible again. A problem which cannot be simply solved by money is disability. And there are different types of disabilities which keep a portion of the global audience out of the learning process, out of museums. There are cognitive disabilities, there are physical disabilities, there's a limited mobility, there's visual impairments, and although museums do the best they could to include that portion of the public in the learning process, that portion of the public often stays behind. When I talk about visual impairments, I talk about the full spectrum of disabilities affecting sight. Same is with the cognitive disabilities. There's a large spectrum of cognitive disabilities going from genetic diseases to PTSD that really keep away an important part of the public from museums and enjoyment of archaeological collections. Limited mobility is also must not be underestimated. Not necessarily you need to have a physical condition. You can maybe simply cannot keep up with visiting very huge museums. For example, I'm not a good walker, and I am subject to museum fatigue pretty often, and I'm always looking around for chairs or couches where I can stop by while I'm visiting a museum. But at times, you know, even light examples of limited mobility can clash with a broken elevator, a not working elevator, the impossibility to reach the second floor or the third floor of the museum. In 2020, with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, this fight that the museums were up against, accessibility and inclusion, became even more fierce. Museums struggled a lot during last year for extended closure. And now we are making an assessment about how brutal it was financially for the museums, the extended closure for the pandemic. You see from the titles of the newspapers and the art magazines that we are still trying to figure out how devastating this blow was for the American system of museums. But the pandemic represented for some museums a big opportunity. The opportunity to fully embrace the digital turn, the opportunity to brought online as much as they could and in whatever shape they could their collections. Those museums who were already ahead of the game, who already had good digital practices in place, survived and thrived during the outbreak of the pandemic. Those who were not ready, unfortunately, failed. An interesting article recently published on Nature on October 2021 demonstrated that the early adoption of digital practices with respect to archiving and dissemination was the key for the American museums who survived during 2020. I put in this slide 3 examples, the best examples known so far: the British Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Smithsonian Museum, who had the best digital infrastructure already before the outbreak of the pandemic, and they basically maintained the relationship that they had with the public without losing much because of the extended closure. The tools which were put in place during 2020 by those virtuous museums were a multitude of different digital techniques, ranging for the creation of virtual tours, for desktop-based experiences and virtual reality experiences, the adoption of a virtual reality and augmented reality platform, a stronger presence on social media. For example, the MoMA, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, is apparently the best museum in terms of social media presence, in particular on Instagram. And there was a lot of experimentation during 2020, in particular using 3D printing and using virtual reality to connect with that public which was usually left behind, the public with the disabilities, cognitive disabilities, public with visual impairments. What I want to do today is present to you the case study of the Farid Karam collection of Lebanese artifacts, the highlights of which are exhibited upstairs in the Tampa Museum of Art. And I want to show you how the research that I've conducted on this collection helped me and my team to define best protocols for museum accessibility and inclusivity. The Farid Karam Medical Doctor Lebanese Antiquities Collection was created by Dr. Farid Karam, who was born in Lebanon and moved to the US in 1967. Dr. Karam, between 1992 and 1999, was associate professor of plastic surgery at the University of South Florida. During his tenure at University of South Florida, before he retired in 1999, he decided to donate his collection of archaeological artifacts to the USF libraries, with an agreement that his collection would have been exhibited in a museum-like space within the library. After the donation took place, Dr. Karam retired and moved back to Lebanon, where he passed away in 2018, reaching one of the highest ranks in the World Scout Association. After the donation, the library created a digital platform. I'm sorry, the library placed the collection in the special collections section of the library. And from there, initial digital infrastructure was created for this collection. The special collections was not in first place equipped to exhibit this collection. So the artifacts were placed in cardboard boxes and were put in a secure place of the special collections, with the understanding that it would have made accessible to USF students, faculty, and the community who were aware of it, were interested in it, and would file a request for it. Very early, USF libraries developed a platform to present in a digital form this collection, being impossible to put it physically in display. So in this initial version of the digital collections, pictures of the artifacts were put online with a description of the archaeological, main archaeological features. The project that we undertook in 2017 about the Karam collection had multiple goals. The 3D digitization of the collection, so producing 3D models instead of simply digitizing it and producing pictures. The analysis of all the legacy data, historical data, and archaeological data produced about this collection. The production of new updated archaeological and historical data through original research. The curation of this digital collection composed by 3D models generated by us and fresh historical and archaeological data, and generating public engagement and producing inclusivity tools. And finally, the ultimate goal of this project, the overarching goal, was to reach global digital accessibility, bring this collection to everybody's home. While we were doing that, we established or tried to establish best practices in doing that, right? So this was the very first digital project that we ever took up on. And in this field, the field of digital archaeology, digital humanities, and digital museum studies, there are really no best practices set in stone. So we decided that we wanted to establish those best practices. When I say we, I mean the USF Institute for Digital Exploration, IDEX. IDEX is one of the institutes of the College of Art and Sciences, and it's an institute which has as main goal the application of digital technologies for the documentation, interpretation, through visualization and dissemination of cultural heritage, with the goal of popularizing cultural heritage, historical heritage, and archaeological heritage. And in particular, one of the main research themes of the Institute is virtual preservation, digital accessibility, archaeology of memory, memory in digital age. So this, and enhance the cognition through digital tools. So this project on the Karam collection was perfectly in line with the research tracks of the Institute. Let's start with the first step of our research, the 3D digitization of the collection. 3D digitization is a kind of a complicated word, which means creating three-dimensional replicas, creating 3D models. The devices and the techniques and the technologies that we adopted to create these digital replicas of the 149 artifacts of the collection were three: laser scanning, structured light 3D scanning, and digital photogrammetry. These are technologies which were designed in first place to be successfully employed in other fields like engineering, like military research, and like medical imaging. In the last decade or so, we were embraced by scholars operating in the field of humanities, social sciences, and cultural heritage studies. In this slide, you can see the devices that we used and listed also the software which were employed to generate the 3D models. And this is part of the equipment of the institute. As you can see here, this is an example of how the 3D digitization project takes place. In that video, you see Stefan Assam, IDEX member and doctoral student in the Department of History of USF, using an arm laser scanner to capture a Roman lamp part of the collection. You see in the second video, like magically, the 3D model of the lamp appearing on the screen. And in the third video, you saw briefly the 3D model fully complete. The second technique is called structured light 3D scanning, whereas laser scanning is a technology based on a device emitting laser beams and mapping out an artifact. Structured light 3D scanning is based on light, is not based on laser beams. So in that video, you actually see one of my students capturing a Greek vessel from the Tampa Museum of Art. And we captured it kind of 3 years ago. And this is a more immediate method to create 3D models. It's real time. It takes just a few minutes to obtain the fully processed and final 3D model using this technology. And you saw in the video the high quality of the models that are generated with this technique. The third technique is called digital photogrammetry, and it's possibly the most, is the most simple and the most affordable technique. The PowerPoint doesn't cooperate. It's a technique based on capturing a multitude of pictures around an object. I'm not talking about various hundreds of high quality digital photographs. Those photographs are then processed with the appropriate software, and as a result, you obtain a 3D model. This is the technique which allows us to obtain the most realistic 3D models, which are absolutely perfect for any public engagement project you may have. The only downsides of these technologies that is extremely time consuming, and it requires a lot of computer power. As a result of the extended application of those three technologies on the collection by me and my students, we obtained a collection of 149 3D models, the digital twin of the Karam collection. And you can see in this slide 3D models with and without color information. Once we completed the first step of the project, that is generating the collection, we moved onward the next central part of the project, which was also the most time consuming and the hardest, entailing the analysis of the legacy data, the generation of new data, and the curation of the collection. The first step was to put together all the information related with the collection. Some of the documents related to it dated to the 80s, and they were typewritten like this. There was no digital record of that. And there was a multitude of Excel spreadsheets and Word documents and embryo of databases. So we had to amalgamate all those data, and we had to distill the information that we needed. So it was pretty complicated. None of the pre-existing data were structured. So we had to do this first survey and work on structuring all the legacy data. The second step, which was also the most exciting, was that of generating new research, generating new data around the collection using traditional methods, which is simply doing research in the library or digital research, finding comparisons for those objects, dating those objects, trying to refine their context of provenance, and at times also using innovative technologies to chemically characterize the objects and obtaining more information about them. Like in this case, when we, with Dr. Tykot of the Department of Anthropology, used the portable X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy to characterize all the glass items and all the bronze items in the collection, metal items in the collection. Once we obtained the 3D models of the collection, we could use the so-called 3D visualization. We could enhance details on the 3D models. We could emphasize minute features and better understand style, shape, and technology, in particular behind pottery and behind sculptures, as we have done in this case of this medieval vessel of the Islamic era, which has complicated stamped decorations with the flowering motifs and some hidden letters in Arabic. And we were able to unfold the decoration in order to read it more carefully and see if really there were hidden letters. There weren't. Or in this case, where we were able to identify traces left by the tools used to sculpt out from a block of limestone this beautiful funerary bust of a bearded man. And you see the incredible quality. I don't know if the streaming will give justice enough to my videos, but I guarantee you that the quality of the 3D model we obtained is really outstanding. What we did once we had all the data and the new data was to structure them according to what is called a metadata schema. What is a metadata schema? All the libraries and archives and museums, they are speaking the same language, which means that they are adopting the same standards to sort out their collections, to archive their collections, and to present their collections to the public. And in particular, we decided to adopt the standards which are mostly adopted in the US and Europe. It's called the Dublin Core Metadata Schema. So we standardized our data according to that example. And then we designed an ad hoc database with Microsoft Access, and we inserted all our data in this database. This was the first time that we were attempting the curation of a collection like this. And it was our first experiment, a very successful experiment. In fact, since then, we have used this database to archive all the data of all our of all the other collections we have worked on in the last years. After this exciting for the scholars, but boring for the public part of the project, we moved onward with trying to generate interest around the collection. And why this is important? Because, the Karam collection is exciting for archaeologists, is exciting for historians, is exciting for public with Lebanese ancestry, but it's not really exciting for the general public. So why should I get excited about this collection? Why should I donate money to see this collection exhibited? It's not simple. So we need to generate interest around it. And we started from the first community that we have a better hand of, which is USF students. And we started in 2017. So I started very early, taking my students to the special collection to have a look at the Karam collection and use digital technologies to create 3D models of it. So back then we used just digital photogrammetry. So my students took pictures with their mobile phones and then they produced 3D models with the pictures they took, or they used the very simple and low cost forms of 3D scanning, like this device called Occipital that can be added to an iPad, transforming an iPad into a structured light 3D scanner. Dr. Denise Kali in 2017 and also in the years afterward routinely took her students from her Greek and Roman archaeology classes to work on the collection, cataloging the collections, creating technical drawings on it, basically helping the USF students to discover that we had this incredible asset in the house, basically at the USF library. In 2017, we had the opportunity working with the USF library to highlight the collection in the frame of a public event called Digital Scholarship in Action. It was one day of workshops and presentations which took place in the library. All the digital humanists and ex-scholars in digital cultural heritage of USF presented their research to their colleagues, to the community, and to the students. And in that frame, we were able to exhibit for the first time some highlights of the Karam collection in the lobby of the USF library. And we put by the original artifacts some of the physical replicas that we generated using 3D printing. And I have on that table some of the 3D prints that we created. And I have to say that I saw a lot of interest by the community and by the participants of that event towards the collection and towards the project that we were working on. And that gave me more motivation to continue on with it. In 2017, we were able to put online the very first version of our digital collection using a web platform called Sketchfab. Sketchfab is a website where you are allowed to share the 3D models that you produce with the global public. It works like a social media network. You create your account, you have your followers, you decide who you want to follow, and your 3D models are subject to public comments and feedback. And when Sketchfab started out, a lot of cultural heritage institutions jumped on it and created digital collections. Already in 2017, there were 500 world museums sharing their digital collections using Sketchfab. And since then, the number of those museums grew on a daily basis. This initial version of our collection was pretty basic. We had basically just the 3D models and a very minimal historical description of those. We had a lot of more materials that we wanted to share, but the platform had some technical constraints which did not allow us to do our job in the way we wanted. In 2017, we also started to test out methods to include the public with visual impairments. So we 3D printed the entire collection. We produced 149 physical replicas of the collection using different materials, experimenting with the different materials. We used the plastic filament, of course, but we also used sandstone in order to create much more realistic 3D models. We used printers working with the liquid resin, and we 3D printed the objects in scale 1:1 and also in a smaller scale. As you can see in this picture here, where there's the bust of the bearded man, nearby is a little brother 3D printed, which is on the table over there. Another tool that we used for generating public engagement and also inclusivity was the so-called edutainment, which is basically education and entertainment. So we produced multiple sets of the 3D printed artifacts. At a certain point in our lab, we had the box and boxes filled with the 3D prints. And then we took these 3D prints around to schools, to public events at USF, and we recruited students who painted our white 3D prints using the 3D models with the full color as a model. And while they were doing that, they were learning about the object. Every minute spent handling the 3D print of a Roman lamp or of a Roman statuette was time that they had learning about the technology behind it, the style behind it. And we had pretty successful results with it. In this slide, you can see the comparison between the 3D models of the objects, pictures of the original objects, and the 3D printed objects painted by the students in the community. As you can see, they are pretty indistinguishable, with the exception of the weight, because the 3D printed objects being made out of plastic are extremely light and immediately recognizable as fakes, as it should be. On the table, you will see later after the presentation some examples of 3D printed and painted models. This was one of the most successful experiments that we had. We really had a lot of engagement. In 2018, also, we had Archaeology Day on campus as part of the Archaeological Institute of America nationwide initiatives. And we exhibited our 3D prints and we engaged elementary school kids with this activity of painting, generating a lot of interest. So in this way, we were gathering data about what strategy was working and what strategy was not working. We also employed for our tests the so-called haptic technology. Haptic technology is something very new. It's a technology based on tactile experience. It's the ability to have a touch interaction with something that doesn't have a physical substance, but as just a digital or electronic substance. There's a large variety of haptic devices. The one that we had access to is a stylus. The stylus works in a very interesting way. So you hold this stylus and you basically move it in the air while you have in front of you the 3D model of an object. And you can feel, moving the stylus, the pressure like you are passing the stylus on the top of the object, okay? This is a technology which is largely used in the medical field, and in particular to teach students certain surgical practices. And we had access to that, and we used it successfully. Of course, there's a variety of haptic devices, being the gloves the most interesting, by which you can literally, feel something which is not in front of you, but it's on a computer screen. So after all this experimentation with 3D printing and haptic technology, we decided we need some usable data, some measurable data. So we designed a questionnaire and we interviewed hundreds and hundreds of students on the USF campus, having them touching our 3D prints and feeling our 3D models using the haptic technology, because we wanted to assess which one of the two was more engaging, which one of the two could include more in the learning process the public. And the result was pretty interesting. We discovered that haptic technology works better than 3D printing, and there was a better feedback with respect to the application of haptic technology, which is also more convenient because 3D printing is time consuming and it's expensive because you need to buy a 3D printer and then you need to buy spools of filament each time that you have to print out a new object. While with the haptic technology, you buy your haptic device once, and with it, you can offer a touch interaction to a multitude of people for an extended number of years. So it was interesting to find out that this is a new trend with respect to touch interaction. Of course, we also experienced with the virtual reality and augmented reality. Here you can see my student Reese with a virtual reality headset, an Oculus Rift on his head, and he's looking at one of the objects of the Karam collection, which is basically huge in front of him. So he's basically can notice very minute details on it, and he's using the remotes to rotate it, but he could move around and go around the object. Virtual reality allows us also to build the virtual environment. So for example, we could have created a 3D fabricated hall, 3D fabricated vitrines, and then place inside of the vitrines the 3D models of the objects and exhibit in virtual reality the entire collection with the objects never leaving their boxes in the special collection. We also tested out augmented reality. Look at this video here. In this video, I am holding my iPad with my left hand and I'm recording with my phone on my right hand. And that's my desk in my office at USF. And as you can see, I'm having one female stone head popping out of my desk with all the measurements. And I can go all around it and the 3D model is there. I can rotate it, enlarging, and I can add to this scene all the 3D models that I want. I can literally make pop in this room all the 149 3D models of the Karam collection, and I can allow you to see them through your phones and your mobile devices. So as you can see, it's a technology which has an incredible potential in terms of transmitting knowledge and also including in the learning process that public which needs a special push or has a special need to participate. At the end of 2018, we had enough data to submit what we had to the judge of our peers. So we started presenting the results of our project in some national and international conferences. We got feedback from our colleagues that helped us perfect our perspective on what we were doing. And in 2019, we published a paper on the virtual Karam project. This is how we named it, that was published as an open source publication, and it's also in the USF repository named Digital Commons. So we shared all the results of our project to the global public who can access to them free of charges. 2019 is also the year when we launched our web platform. We launched the website virtualkaram.com. Remember when I told you that in 2017, we struggled with the technical constraints of Sketchfab. And in order to go around those technical constraints, we created our own website. And in this website, we fully shared the story of our project with videos, pictures, the rationale behind it. And our web platform was also nominated for the 2019 award for outstanding work in digital archaeology of the Archaeological Institute of America. In the platform, which is still up and it will be for the time being, you will find all the objects of the collections. In the landing pages, you will find the thumbnails, the small pictures of them, and then the objects are divided in categories. You have metal items, you have pottery, you have terracotta items, stone items, and finally you have glasses. When you click on one of those small pictures, you will get on one side the 3D model, and you can zoom in, zoom out, change the light, all the filters. You can use all the visualization tools you want. You can also take digital measurements on it, slice it, and create technical views. And then you will find all the historical and the archaeological description that we put together from the analysis of the legacy data and from the work we did of creating new data through originals research. All the data structured according to the metadata schema, Dublin core. In 2019, once we published our paper and once we put out our collection, we moved a step forward in terms of public engagement. I published a paper on the popular website, The Conversation. And it was not an ordinary paper, it was based on digital storytelling. So we created a video together with the editors of The Conversation, where we, using digital storytelling, shared with the public the story of our project. And it was pretty successful. It was viewed more than 8,000 times with a multitude of comments, and it was picked up by a lot of different media agencies. So it was pretty good in terms of results. In spring 2021, so not so distant in time, something amazing happened. One of the former students of mine who worked actively on the 3D printing side of the project and on the edutainment side of the project. She was an artist herself, and she was pretty good at painting up the 3D prints. And she left, she graduated out, went back to Texas, got a position at the Lone Star College in Austin. And in spring 2021, being here in the Department of Art, participated to an exhibition where all the faculty exhibited their work, and she exhibited the painted 3D prints of the Karam collection. So this was a sort of rehearsal for a real exhibition. It was the first time that the Karam collection was exhibited, but not the real artifacts. The 3D prints, the painted 3D prints of the artifacts were exhibited and in Texas, but the feedback was actually very good. And now we get to the last stage of our project, how to achieve global digital accessibility. We achieved global digital accessibility in spring 2021 when the USF Library created a brand new system for managing and sharing the digital collections as a result of the consolidation between the libraries of the Tampa campus, the Sarasota campus, and the St. Pete campus. The revamped Digital Commons is now used by the USF libraries for the dissemination of the collections, and our collection of 3D models with all the research in terms of history and archaeology we generated is now accessible not just through our website, but also through the website of the library, which is charged with making it accessible in perpetuity. And all this work that we have done brought us here today at the Tampa Museum of Art and to the collection, to the exhibition that opened in November, highlights from the Karam collection, which is basically a dream come true and the result of the hard work of my good friend Branko Van Oppen and the kindness of the Dean of the Library, Todd Chavez. So the collection is finally back. It's not an orphaned collection anymore. It's not a neglected collection anymore. This is also the dream come true of Dr. Karam. When he donated to the library, he wanted it shared with the library and now with the public. And now it is shared with the public. It is shared with the global public digitally. It is shared with the public of the Tampa Museum of Art. For the highlights of the Karam collection, me and my staff at IDEX created a dedicated website for it. And we generated the QR codes, which are attached to the vitrines upstairs. And we was basically working with Branko Van Oppen, created a sort of digital catalog for the collection. So there's just so much space for the description in the labels of each vitrine. And of course, the public wants to know more about every single object. That's why we created this digital catalog. So just, clicking on the QR code viewer on your phone, you will be able to access to these online contents where you will find not just the 3D model, but also the fresher archaeological data that were generated by Branko Van Oppen in the occasion of this exhibition. So basically, those are the goals that we had at the very beginning, almost 4 years ago. And in my humble opinion, we achieved them all. And we also achieved the best practices, which became the model that we adopted for the other 5 collections that we have digitized, curated, and disseminated so far. And now I'm seeing around, other university groups and other community of scholars looking at our best practices with interest. So we finally, accomplished what we wanted to accomplish. And speaking of accomplishments, I could not have accomplished anything with the help of a multitude of people, with the help of Dean Chavez at the USF Library, without the help of my good friend, Dr. Matthew Knight, who was a former director of the Special Collections and now is associate librarian with USF Libraries, Jonathan Rodriguez Perez, who in those days worked at the Special Collections, Richard Bernardi, USF Libraries, and my amazing graduate students at IDEX, Stefan Assam, Kaiten Kingsland, Frank Amico, Rhys Combe, and Lisa Schwartz. And of course, a special thank goes to Branko Van Oppen and Brittany Pevel, which made possible this presentation today. If you want to know more about the work of the Institute for Digital Exploration, you can certainly visit our website, www.usfidex.com. You can also visit our Sketchfab collection, where we have over 1,200 3D models of cultural heritage artifacts, or our Facebook page, where we tried as often as possible to keep the public updated with our projects. We have worked in these years pretty close with the Tampa Museum of Art, creating 3D models of the highlights of the museum collection. And if you want to know more about that, which could be the subject of another 45 minutes lecture, you can certainly, book me up for another lecture, or you can visit the Sketchfab page that we dedicated to the Tampa Museum of Art 3D collection. Thank you.
Now we open it up for questions.
Okay. So do I repeat the question? The question is about, are there objects which were particularly challenging to work on in this collection? The answer is yes. And there were 79 challenging objects, and it's 79 glass vessels. So glass, and in particular ancient glass, which is iridescent and it's also very bright, is very challenging to be captured. Glass and transparent materials are the enemies of 3D digital technologies. So when we started, we failed immediately. We looked around to find, methods. We could not find them. So we were ready to give up. But then we did some experimentations. We were very stubborn, and we defined new protocols to capture this type of glass objects. and we succeeded, and we are very proud of that. And now we are using those protocols to capture other objects like made out of gold or silver, which are equally challenging. So there are, when I say we established best protocols, it means that we work to address technical issues, right? This field is still pretty new, even if it's was established more than 15 years ago. It's still new to us because we have adopted it lately. So we managed to crack it and find a solution to it. But glasses was the hardest part. There is a very good question. So the question is about how hard this process of 3D digitization is outside of a controlled environment, which can be the lab. It is challenging. So the main challenge comes from the light, natural light versus artificial and controllable light. So for example, when we work outdoor under the sun and there's too much light and there's heat, scanners will act up. So you need to work at the right time of the day, and you may want to use tents to control the light as much as you can. You don't necessarily need to work in your lab. We have, our equipment is pretty portable, even the photogrammetric studio. So we have worked very often inside of museums and storages. So I would say, yes, there are challenges working outdoor, but there are ways to go around those challenges. I'd rather prefer to work in an indoor environment, especially when it comes to medium-sized objects. But of course, when we 3D scan entire sites, when we 3D scan large size monuments, we need to, find a solution to all the issues caused by natural light. What if the audience at home has questions?
It looks like none have shown up yet, but those of you joining us via Zoom or Facebook are welcome to pop your questions into the Q&A or the comment section, and we're happy to answer them. I see Branko has rejoined us.
Hey, Branko.
Hi, Davide. First of all, thank you so much for this wonderful lecture. So much hard work that goes into it. That goes to show that even a small scale exhibition as is upstairs in the museum can take years of work to prepare. And you have done so much already, reaching out to the wider community. Really, congratulations on all of that. I wanted to share a question that Jonathan Perry wrote in the Q&A over here via Zoom. He asked if the Lebanese civil war impeded efforts to establish provenance of the items in the Karam collection, and quickly the answer is yes, certainly. But Davide, can you first tell us if there was any kind of acquisition information from the Karam collection? Where did Mr. Karam purchase his items? Do we know that at all?
More for you than me. What do you think, Branko?
I do not know how much paper documentation is at the USF library at all, but this question, of course, is relevant in the sense that Dr. Karam fled Lebanon because of the civil war raging in his home country. So he must have only taken with him what was significant to him. And paperwork is one of the least significant things. I've moved several times in my life, sometimes once a year over a period of a decade. Who cares about paperwork? You have your important collection, but you're not going to take all your documents with you.
Certainly Dr. Karam left in a hurry because the collection is all small size objects. If he had the larger objects in his collection, certainly left them there. They're all very small, they're all very portable, 4 or 5 suitcases, and the collection goes with him. Exactly, so that answers part of the issue.
Jonathan Perry was particularly interested in the Serapis statuette, as I can imagine. And the issue of provenance, the origin of an object, comes into particular question here, because if we would have known where it was bought and maybe even where it was discovered, we might learn a little bit more about the dissemination of the worship of Serapis, which is so interesting because he is a god who was particularly worshipped in Alexandria in Egypt? And Mr. Perry, I think you can already feel the answer. We do not know if this statue was unearthed in modern day Lebanon, or if it was purchased on the art market, but was exported from Egypt at some point in modern history. I do not see any other questions in the Q&A, but anyone who is on Zoom who would like to ask anything, you can use the raise hand
explain. That's what my students tell me. At the end of my lectures, I ask if my students have questions, and they say, we don't have questions because you were so clear and so good at explaining yourself that we're good.
This is absolutely true. I don't see any Q&As. I don't see any raised hands, but Davide, really terrific work. And is there a part in all the dreams you had about the Karam collection that hasn't been realized just yet, that maybe we can help you with?
A part of the, you mean one of the goals?
One of your dreams, yes.
Yeah, I'm very happy and to see that the collections is finally shared for real with the public here at Tampa Museum of Art. And I'd like really for this thing to be long-term. I remember the first time that I learned about this collection. I just moved to Tampa from Sicily. It was August 2016. And a colleague took me to the library and showed me some posters that on the 4th floor of the library are hung on the walls. And they are posters of some pieces of the Karam collection. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, it's a collection of archaeological artifacts that we have here at the library. Show me. And he showed me. And the very moment that I saw this collection, in those boxes, I said, I want to do something with it. I want to take it to the world. I want to create a scanner with my students. I want to share it. And one day I want to see it in a museum. And it took just 5 years, but I shared it with the global public, and now it's in a museum where it deserves to be. So can't be happier.
We are very grateful for having all your hard work as a preparation for this exhibition. And if it's a popular exhibition, perhaps we can bring it back at one point, incorporate selections into our own permanent collection, or be ambitious and exhibit all 148 of them in the near future.
Sounds great to me.
So with that, I think this would be the conclusion of our talk. For those of you who are joining us in person, you have the convenience of, you are welcome to go to the galleries to see the Karam collection on view today. Those of you joining us virtually, I hope you can visit the Tampa Museum of Art in the near future to see the artifacts. And with that, I hope everybody has a happy holiday season, and we look forward to seeing you at the museum.
Thank you all for joining in. Happy holidays, and hope to see you in person sometime soon.